Now that I've got the eye monster prepped for rigging, I'm going to take it and it's on this layer here. I am going to set the layer to template mode, and that's because I want to be able to see the monster when I create its skeleton, but I don't want to be able to select it. So there's this skeleton menu here, and the skeleton menu's principal job is to create and edit joints. So what is a joint? In your body, the joints are the things that make the rotation happen. So your elbow, your hip, your knee, it's the same in 3D. Every time I create a joint, it gives me the ability to rotate something. With this, joints form a hierarchic structure. So when I create them, I'll go to Create Joints, and I'll just start making some. I'm going to use my side view here, and I will make a joint for the hip, a joint for the knee, for the ankle, the ball of the foot. I'm going to put that right here on the ground, somewhere around where the ball of the foot should be. Then I'll do one for the toes and one for the heel. When I'm done creating what we call a joint chain, I will press Enter. Now we've seen hierarchies before because we've done both grouping and parenting. In this case, each subsequent joint is the child of the previous joint in the chain. If I go over to my outliner, I can shift-click this little plus sign, and now I can see joint 1 is the parent of joint 2, joint 2 is the parent of joint 3, 3 is the parent of 4, 4 is the parent of 5, 5 is the parent of 6. That's a hierarchy. It's important to remember that in 3D, there's always going to be one parent and then as many children as you want. So when I form this structure, I need to keep that in mind. We're only doing legs because legs are a little bit easier, but when we do arms, a lot of people have trouble with the elbow because there are a couple of joints in the human body for the elbow, but in 3D you can really only have one. So we're sticking with legs. Legs aren't going to be that bad. It's important that I name all of these joints. Obviously, once I've got 2 legs, it's going to be hard for me to remember that joint 1 is the left hip or the right hip. At present, I am just going to double-click on it and call it hip, and I'm going to call it joint because this is a joint object. Nomenclature is really important here because some of these joints are going to be really good rotation points and some aren't. So the hip is a really good rotation point, and I want to give it this joint suffix so that I remember that this is something that I want to bind to my skin. The next joint is the knee joint, and that's another one where I'm going to want to bind it to my skin. Joint 3 is the ankle joint. Joint 4 is the ball joint. Joint 5 is the toe joint, and joint 6 is the heel. The heel is an unimportant joint. I'm going to use it later as a snapping point, but I'm not going to bind it to my skin, and there are a couple of really good, solid reasons for this. So I'm going to leave off that JT suffix, and later on I will not bind this joint to my skin. So the first good reason for that is if I look at my joints in the perspective view, when I look at them, I see that each one of them has a little set of blue, green, and red lines, just like my coordinate system axis. Joints work on a system of relative coordinate space. The joint is this circle part, and then it has a bone that connects it to the next joint. So when I look at this, I can say that X is pointing down the bone. X is pointing down the bone. When I get to the final joint in any chain, the joint reorients itself to the world, which means that it does not point down the bone. Its rotation is always different from the other joints in the chain, so that final joint is something that I need to make sure that the previous joint points in the right direction, but it's not necessarily something that I want to use for animation purposes. So I am going to create a heel joint, but I'm not going to bind it. Now the other thing that I see when I look in the perspective view is that I've made my leg in the middle of the eye monster and it looks, you know, not cool. So if I select the hip joint, that will allow me to move the entire joint chain. And let's come over to my front view and see if I can get that centered within the body. That looks pretty good. If I select the knee, I can align the knee joint like so. And again, I am moving all of the rest of the joints in the chain. I can go through and do this all one at a time. If you ever want to move a single joint without moving its children, the D key on your keyboard will let you move just one joint. And remember, D is a toggle. It will let you it will let you move a pivot point or a joint. If you press D a second time, you'll move back to normal mode. That looks pretty good. This leg happens to be the leg on the left side of the character, meaning that this is the left leg. So the last thing I'll do is I will select my hip joint, and in the Modify menu, I am going to use this prefix hierarchy name command. The prefix I'm going to use is LF underscore. I'll use LF for left and RT for right, so I'm using different letters on both sides. You can write out the word left and the word right, but that's a lot of characters, and you don't have to. I recommend against using just L and just R, because when you rig, you do a lot of searching and replacing of names. Yeah, think about that. So I'm going to use LF for left with an underscore and RT for right with an underscore. I will say OK here, and that is my first joint chain. The next joint chain I'm going to make, I will use the front view. I'll go back into skeleton, create joints, and I'm going to make 2 joints here. I'm going to need one at the base of the hips. I'm just going to hold down X so I know I'm snapping to the grid. And then I'm going to put a second one kind of right in the middle of the head. So I've got 2 joints here. This first one I'm going to use as the root for the rest of the skeleton. This is going to be the top joint in my entire hierarchy, so I'm going to call it root. I'm not necessarily going to bind it to the skin, so I'm going to leave off the JT suffix. The second joint here I am going to call the head joint, and that's going to move my head around. Just move these 2 a little bit. I'd like to get that a little higher and maybe this a little bit lower. All right. So now I've got 2 skeletons. I've got this one and this one. Move that down just a touch. To put them together, I'm going to take the left hip joint and make it the child of the root joint. I can do that either by middle mouse dragging and dropping in the outliner. You'll see that when I do that, it creates a bone between the 2 joints. I can also do that by selecting the left hip joint, then shift selecting the root joint and pressing the P key on my keyboard. That will also create a bone. With the left hip joint selected, the last thing that I have to do is back in the skeleton menu, I'm going to run mirror joints. You always want to run mirror joints through the option box. In mirror joints, you need to mirror across YZ. I know, I know it seems weird because, of course, the x-axis is the one we're flipping over, but YZ is the appropriate axis for mirroring with joints. I'm also going to do a search for LF underscore and replace it with RT underscore apply. That should create the left leg for you. And now I've got both legs. I am almost good to go. The last thing I want to do is very simple. If I look at the right side, I can see that this X arrow is pointing up the bone instead of down the bone. If I look at the left side, it's pointing down the bone. I want all of my joints to be oriented in the same direction, so I'm going to click on the root joint, and back in the skeleton menu, I'm going to run the orient joint command. That's going to cause X to point down the bone on all of the joints. I'll stop here. This will give you a chance to build your own skeletons. In the next lesson, we will bind the skin and make sure that everything is bound correctly.